Today is March 5th, 2024. I'm Tom Ackerman. This is a SoundStory with Don Eggleston. Don, it is great to meet you. I know that you and I have crossed paths in the past, but it's great to be able to sit down with you and talk about your life and perspective. And how are you?
I'm great, and thanks for talking with me today, Tom. Tyler, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm doing great. I was excited to do this. Our kids gave this to me as a Christmas gift, and they said, we want to hear from you. We want to have something to hang on to. And it was surprising because I think they've heard every story I have to tell about my life, and they even tell me to number my stories sometimes to save time, but I was very flattered that they gave this to me as a gift.
Have they ever heard someone interview you before?
Yes. When I worked in one of my careers, phase of my career, they got to hear me be interviewed about organizational mission and purpose. But it was one of those, I remember the host saying, we have about 90 seconds. So,
We have all the time in the world here.
So get this said quickly.
Yeah, no problem. No, I see you've handed me two books as well. With All We Were, Mission, Purpose, and Transformation.
Right.
And the two dialogues, Interior and Interpersonal Questions That Build Hope and Community. Mm-hmm. You align with me. I can tell you that. I do like to think in the present, think about who I am, what my purpose is, but also to think very closely with my own feelings. Like my enrichment in life is not really about money. Mm-hmm. And I've always felt that way internally. Mm-hmm. Is that along the lines of how you feel?
Right, I do. I feel, I say to people frequently that I have a very rich life. I would call it economically, modest or comfortable. But the richness for me has come from learning in my life and coming through some pretty difficult experiences, and then also things that you just can't really measure as a gift. So for me, very basic things: having food and shelter, relationships, a wonderful spouse, good friends, education. Those are the things to me that are the riches I have, even though I'm fortunate to be comfortably retired and still able to use my gifts in a lot of ways. So I do. I feel very much in the present and try to live that way. My wife influenced me greatly that way. She knows that I can be analytical and worrisome beyond what I should be, and Marianne has influenced me greatly to not let that get too much of a foothold for me.
Well, we're constantly going down different paths. We're dealing with a lot of things in our lives, so it's good to be centered. It's good to be told every once in a while that you need a little kick in the rear end and kind of get you focused, and she provides that.
She helps provide it. She's a nurse by background, an intensive care nurse at St. Louis U for most of her career, but has done other things in that realm of nursing. She's also been through a life-threatening illness episode when our boys were little. And I didn't think she needed an adjustment in terms of how to look at life and appreciate it. She didn't, but that helped deepen us as a couple, helped her to just really stay the course in terms of what matters and what doesn't. And she's also got a great sense of humor that really comes out at just about the right times. It's what I call a nursing sense of humor, which can be kind of sarcastic and kind of pointed at times, but always meant in the right spirit. So yeah, she keeps me very much anchored. I feel very grateful to be married to her.
How long ago did you retire?
I retired in 2018, and I had worked at SSM Healthcare for 30 years, and I was lucky in that I had 3 careers without having to leave the organization. So I did a lot of community health outreach, mobile mammography, medical screenings, things primarily for underserved populations. And then I did leadership development, especially with physicians who had taken leadership jobs that had to manage other doctors. And that was a challenge for them. And we had a small corporate university that we developed to help people just learn leadership skills. And then the last decade, really, I worked in what was called mission integration. And that was taking the direction of a faith-based organization that was founded by religious sisters. And as they diminished in number, how do you take their principles and their values and embed them in the organization without turning everyone into a Roman Catholic? But how do you ensure that the way you interview and select, the way you care for underserved people, the way you treat each other, how does that mission get reflected? So it was a great career, and I miss some of it, but I don't miss it working as hard as I did and traveling like I did. We had hospitals that I was traveling fairly often in 5 states. So I loved it, though. I miss that. I miss the people.
Do you think that you trained some people to the point that they were prepared for what was to come in the pandemic, something that none of us had a playbook for?
Right. I think our organization did. I think I had a piece of that. I think the thing that helped us the most was we had a very clear mission statement, and we had 5 very clear, memorable values. And we had a methodology where this comes out, I think, in caring for people in the pandemic was we had a methodology where we would, if we had major decisions to make, we would look at those decisions in the light of our 5 values of compassion, respect, excellence, stewardship, and community. And in the light of those, how do we make decisions? So in a decision to have people be treated in isolation and not always able to have access, what's the most compassionate thing to do for families? What's the best stewardship stance? What's the best use of the resources we had? I didn't have everything to do with that. I was part of a group that helped develop the mission statement by interviewing 3,500 employees. We did focus groups and helped derive that. But I think it was exhausting for people. I helped volunteer with chaplains at that time who were having to see patients through their phones many times, and with masks outside of a room. How do you do spiritual actions like anointings and prayer, with people? How do you connect families? Sometimes, unfortunately, people had to say goodbye at a distance as opposed to staying in a room with someone. I think that, to me, as an observer and not a full participant, that was the most heartbreaking thing about it. I think it had its own fallout culturally. I think it created many unnecessary divides in our society. I don't think we've recovered from it yet. But I think it had, I was proud of the attempts we made, to be as compassionate and clinically as astute as possible. It was so clinically challenging. It was, again, the speed at which that was dealt with, the need to move medicines and vaccines forward. I think someday we will appreciate that, but I think that's going to take a while to appreciate what that called for from us.
You've witnessed a lot of breakthroughs, I'm sure, in the medical field through the years.
Yeah, I really did. I think just things that we now presume are available, like mammographies and colonoscopies, blood testing for certain phenomenon, bypass surgery that's not done in the same dramatic, intrusive way that it was done before. Chemotherapy that's getting better. It's still pretty rough in many instances. I think the biggest breakthrough I see is our attempts to be more proactive and not, if we can get the population not to wait till something awful happens, or symptoms occur at a dramatic level. Yeah, I did. I saw tremendous number of changes, and the people in that field are so talented, and the researchers are so diligent. My wife has a chronic liver disease that she's treated for at St. Louis University, and the changes I see in the 29 years since she was diagnosed, we're both involved there in board capacities, and that's one example of one element of research. She has an illness that did not have a great survival rate 40 years ago. And the breakthrough in the research is dramatic. It's been life-saving, life-extending. That's one example anyway.
How did you meet her?
We were basically introduced through my cousin, who was a nurse with her at St. Louis U. And in my background, I was in the seminary for quite a while. I went into the priesthood and was in the priesthood for 3 years. And when I left, after a lot of consultation and therapy and things you might imagine, I had not dated anybody in about 10 years. Mm-hmm. So I was really out of practice, low in confidence, dated different people just to learn about them. I'd had in mind wanting to have a spouse someday, but was not the most graceful dater at that time. And I was semi-broke in grad school, working a few jobs. And my cousin said, you need to meet this girl who I had met one time before in a couple larger occasions, 2 times before in larger occasions. And I just remember thinking, I don't think she's going to be that interested. I'm not real adept at this. And it just clicked. I was going to UMSL for grad school, and she was taking nursing classes there, and we would meet once in a while and have like a soda or a tea in the student union. And finally I thought, I'm just going to ask her. One cool thing about it is Marianne, I misunderstood that she was going to Europe with a girlfriend, and they were going to meet a guy that she dated who lived in Lebanon, and they were going to meet him in Spain. And I thought, oh man, she's going to get back with him, and he's going to propose, and I'm going to be history. And instead, I wrote down on my calendar when she said she was coming back. And I called her and woke her up the day that she came back jet-lagged. Wow. And said, how was your trip? And I was listening for it was ready. Great. I got engaged or I got married. And so it was neat that from that it just began.
And then you asked her out.
Yeah. And we dated for probably about 2.5 years when we engaged, when I asked her to marry me. There's a great story behind it. People asked me, one of my relatives asked me when he was getting married, how did I know Marianne was the one? And I went into all these qualities that I saw in her and had some trouble finishing. I was very emotional about it. And she said, I married Don because I was 32 and I was running out of options. That's why I married him. So that's what I mean by her sense of humor.
Yeah, that's good. Your kids were born in the 80s, mm-hmm. Tim and Andy. Tell me about them.
Yeah, Tim was born on our first anniversary. And then Andy came just about 16, 17 months after him. They're both here in town, which is great. Tim works for Purina. He's in talent acquisition or recruitment for them. And his wife, Marion, works there as well in marketing. They have a new granddaughter, a new baby. And in fact, she's 1 year old today on March 5th, Lainey or Elaine. And Tim was very involved in Mizzou for 10 years. After he graduated, he recruited for them at the local regional high schools, state high schools, and then went to Purina. Met Marion, they got married in our backyard during COVID, and I was able to witness, serve as the minister of it. When the epidemic lifted, they had like a second marriage, I guess you'd say, for a larger group of people, which was up in Maine, which was very beautiful. Our other boy, Andy, is currently dating someone. He lives in the Benton Park area. He works for BJC Healthcare and does the electronic health record. Both, I'm biased, but they're both remarkable young men. They have very generous hearts and volunteer spirits, and 2 very different personalities. But they've been really a distinct blessing to be their dad. I feel very, very fortunate to be the father of these guys.
Couple of St. Louis boys like you.
Yeah, they're Vianney High boys. We've lived in one house in Shrewsbury. We called it our starter home, and now it's the add-on and fix-up a bit starter home. I grew up in Dogtown, and Marianne grew up in Belnor near UMSL. And we've been able to stay in St. Louis, which is professionally isn't always possible. So I feel fortunate. I love the city. I love the community. I know we have a million things to address, but I love being here.
We do. I'm from here as well, and there is something just different about St. Louis that mm-hmm. we're different. I don't know. Yeah. We don't really apologize for it. That's who we are. How do you view being a St. Louis, and like what is different about us? What do you love about St. Louis?
I love that I see it as a community that I would call it has a reasonable sense of humility. I think we have a pretty welcoming spirit. I know we have divisions too that I have seen in my volunteerism. I think we have attitudes at times that are not good for each other, and judgments that are made that are frequently not warranted. But I think it's people who come from outside who I have met frequently say it's such a welcoming place. And I also see it as, this is just my view, not an extremist community. I think I don't care to live that way anyway. So I see it as interesting in terms of neighborhoods and how they've evolved. I think where our son is in Benton Park, 30 years ago, that was a very different neighborhood. Dogtown was a neat neighborhood to grow up in. We would run around the neighborhood and call guys out of the backyard to go play ball together. Shrewsbury reminds me of that a little bit. It's got a little hometown feel where we are. Mm-hmm. I think it's underrated for its restaurants.
No, for sure.
I think our media presence, literally, not just because I'm in your studio today, but to have a voice of St. Louis that I listen to whenever I'm able to. I think we have great resources that way. I think our arts are better than we're given credit for. I love having sports teams to follow. I helped work as a Blues locker room assistant when I was a kid, and never lost that feel for what a great game hockey is and how demanding it is. I think our athletes are fairly accessible, in the community. They seem to like it when they get here. I just think we culturally underestimate ourselves. We underestimate around our architecture, around artistic opportunities, a lot of music genre or venues, I think. And it's easy to get around.
That's a great description.
Yeah.
But and also the negative aspects which hang on us too. I mean, we definitely have some scars that we need to repair. You worked at AB too, didn't you?
Just in a part-time job in school. It was a fun one because they used to keep Clydesdales down at the stables there for visitors, and you'd trot them out, into that stable. And a friend of my dad's asked me if I wanted this job, and he said, it's great. You can kind of work when you want, primarily weekends. We'll work around your schedule with school. Well, it turned out to be mucking the stalls of the Clydesdales and periodically helping to, wash them and bathe them so they could get ready and helping the people who really knew what they were doing with that. But it was fun. I also would follow them. When we had a parade, I followed the Clydesdales with a barrel and a dolly and a shovel and cleaned up after the Clydesdales. So the marching band who came behind them, and more than once I'd see somebody would be standing there who knew me, along the parade route and would yell out, Eggleston's here, with the pooper scooper. And that was just a neat job because I made a little more money than I would have in other settings. And I love animals. I was intimidated by those as they're really beasts. They're behemoths. But, I just love any chance I have to be in the presence of animals too. And it was just it was like a college post-grad job where you didn't have super responsibility yet. That's like that really sweet window where you're working, but you're not really being expected to be a super performer yet.
Yeah.
So it was neat.
Yeah, it is neat. That's very St. Louis, by the way. Worked with the Clydesdales, Blues, I love all that stuff. I wanted to circle back to, you mentioned media and having worked in it for a long time. I do enjoy talking about this. Media has definitely changed over time. You've witnessed a lot of changes in your life. What has media changed for the good or not so good?
Oh boy, I think it's both. This is not exactly purely a media example, but working in healthcare, when we could harness media to gather data, that was incredible. I worked in a system where a doctor might be perplexed by something she was looking at with a patient or want consultation, and she could reach out to somebody in South Africa or in Europe, and look at data studies. That to me was remarkable, that you could gather information that would help you to make strong decisions for people. In terms of the social side of it, I think one of my gripes is I don't think social media is very social. I think it's antisocial in many respects, and it's misused. I think what happens here at Odyssey, KMOX, I don't see that as raw pronouncement of opinion, which I think the other side of that, I see that on the far left and the far right. I don't really consider that media per se. The root word of media mean being in the middle. In Latin, it means call to the middle. I don't see it happening, and it's distressing to me. But on the other hand, there are so many, profound things you can learn through a medium like this. Coming in this morning and hearing about Hoboken, and hearing it just how did a city address an issue? That to me is a great benefit of this. And, being able to learn through media, we went to Europe a couple times, and it's amazing to be able to just hop online and read about what's Switzerland like. What should you go see in Switzerland? What's it, my wife has family in Ireland, what are you can look ahead through that and foster a plan for what do we want to do when we're on this trip. But back to that idea of media, I use it judiciously because I think I love listening to baseball, listening to hockey, that, and listening for news that helps me to form an opinion that's measured, including print media, but I get very concerned about the misuses of it, which one of my Lenten practices is to reduce my, looking at media that's not, I get on YouTube for scores and stories of people and things like that, but I really limit it because I find it detrimental at times.
I took it off my phone for a little while back in November, Facebook and Instagram. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't because I was being influenced or anything by extremists one way or the other, but I felt like I was spending too much time. We actually had a guest on our station that said the book he wrote was called Calling BS on Busy. And one of his suggestions was take it off your phone and see what happens. And you can go on your laptop and check your accounts. Right. I keep Twitter on it. I got to have Twitter for news and interacting with listeners. But I felt like taking Facebook and Instagram off was going to be interesting. And I found that I spend a lot more time, doing things that I used to do, like take walks outside, maybe read a little bit, or just spend some time in solitude in the quiet of my thoughts, or prayer, or, in some cases, meditation, just, getting in touch with who I am. I feel like you're along those lines too.
I really try to do it. I think when I was in the seminary, there were a lot of great things that took place there. I learned how to cultivate what I would call an interior life. Besides academically, it was challenging. But to learn how to just be still and be quiet and build in time for that. And as years went by, some of the most profound periods of silence were sitting with my wife when she was in labor with our kids, and being with her in a recovery room after emergency C-sections, quiet, being at my parents' bedsides in their final days. I didn't lose my parents suddenly. There's a remarkable experience that comes in that kind of quiet. And then I have almost a daily practice of getting up and just being still. And then I might read something from an inspirational book, or take our dog for an early walk. They're great at reminding you to be grounded. It's aggravating to keep stopping at every tree for the first 200 yards, but they're very much in the moment. So yeah, that's been transformative for me to learn And yet I did feel like I had to make this change this Lenten season because it's too easy to kind of let that creep up, and with the algorithms that'll come from something I click on, I see just some simple changes. I'm on the board of Vianney High School, and I went in one of the classrooms the other day to observe, and they have the kids hang their phones up in a little shoe rack. And, they can go get that if they're doing a computation. They've got computers and all, but sometimes they can go grab those for some assignment. But trying to help cultivate in the boys, it's an all-boys school, helping cultivate, we don't have to be looking at this device all the time. And how do you don't always form beneficial relationships. You can through that medium, but I'm concerned that could get lost because I didn't grow up with it, and I don't want to be an old coot about it, but I didn't grow up with it, and I find a need more and more. I think if we were more still, we wouldn't treat each other the way we do sometimes.
Yeah. I used to just get on my bike when I was a kid and just ride around all day. I'd come back for dinner, I mean,
did that.
I do sometimes long for those days. Not that you can't. You can still get on a bike and go do that. Do you feel the kid in you sometimes?
Yeah, I'm that way. Any chance I have to play catch. We have a kid down the street that, I coached our guys in baseball and coached other CYC sports. And, it's just something like that brings me way back. As a kid, we would walk through the neighborhood, like I may have said, and call out, old Tyler, old Tom, get the ball and bat, walk over to Forest Park. Yeah, I miss that. I had a bike. I had a great job. This is a tale of my time. In fifth grade, I remembered working for a pharmacy in our neighborhood that paid me in cash, and I would deliver prescriptions on a bike to people. And they also would have me deliver cigarettes and whiskey. And you'd think, here you are, Mr. Smith, here's your antibiotic and your cigarettes and your whiskey, But that was how I got around. And we didn't live too far from the park, Forest Park. So, we'd get on our bikes and lock them up and run through the zoo. I do miss that. Marianne has helped me. We walk together quite a bit. Trying to just helping me to not just do it for exercise, but to get back to kind of who we were and who we are.
Yeah, it's good for you.
Yeah.
On a serious note, you mentioned alcohol. There's some alcoholism in your family. Can you tell me about that and looking back at yourself and how you protected yourself from that, should we say?
Yeah. Yeah. My dad was the person with the issue. I have a brother who I'm really proud of who yesterday celebrated, I think, his 33rd year of sobriety. Dan's a model for us. My dad, God love him, a war veteran. I think he didn't have the best upbringing. His generation didn't necessarily go to therapy. They'd go sit on a bar stool, and that's not the ideal way, but probably the pivotal thing was, believe it or not, a baseball coach who took me aside and said, he was hard. I mean, he was pretty direct. Like one time he said, he always called me Eggleston instead of Eggleston. Eggleston, you're not planning to play college baseball, are you? And I said, I don't think so. And he goes, that's a good idea that you're not. So he could be pretty direct. But he told me, when your dad shows up and sits on a beer cooler and watches your game, you look like you never saw a baseball before. He said it just unnerves you, and you're not the same, and you don't have your spontaneity. And he said, I'm a recovering alcoholic, and I have 13 years of sobriety. And back then it was called Alateen. Now it's called, Al-Anon or Adult Children of Alcoholics. That was really a breakthrough. I can remember going in the first group and somebody saying, hi, Don, why are you here? And I said, well, I think I just want to observe. And I remember the guy saying, no, you don't. You're here because you need to work, right? So that took, it's an interesting phenomenon because it can stay with you. Like, I think, unfortunately, what got planted in me was self-doubt and self-criticism. So I've gone to therapy around that. It was probably partly at the root of leaving the priesthood. It wasn't just whether to be a priest anymore. Remember the therapist saying, tell me about your family.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't want to talk about my family. I want to talk about whether I want to be a priest or not. And it really was obvious that there were a number of things woven into that. And every so often in my life, I go for what I call fine-tuning. I just go talk to a therapist and say, I'm thinking this kind of stuff. I'm not really harming a ton of people, but I'm mostly hard on myself. The one therapist told me to watch out for my inner roommate. You know, she said, if you're not careful, you have an inner roommate that says things to you that you would never let a roommate say to you. You know, you'd move out if you got spoken to that way, or you'd pay your lease and leave. And she said, you know, Don, you're really pretty hard on yourself, despite being, and this was when I was 64. I wasn't a kid. But it resurfaces, you know, so I think I've learned to stay on top of it. The cool adjunct to that, Tom, is the seminary gave us 1 million opportunities to be of service to people. Like I worked at the city jail for 3 years and worked with special needs adults. You know, they were doing that to form you, you know, to get you into circumstances that challenged you and made you uncomfortable, quite frankly. And a lot of times, you know, I felt like, you know what, I'm really not far ahead of many of these people that I'm supposed to be helping. And a lot of them taught me things that helped me to grow. So, you know, that was
grow in the area of gratitude.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. In fact, I have been doing this. I figured it out the other day. I've been doing this for 13 years. I learned this from a monk in a monastery where I went on a retreat. And he taught me the gratitude exercise. And he said, you should stop multiple times a day and ask, what am I grateful for in this moment? And he said it could be that you're breathing, that you breathe all night. Like, you know, with my health, I don't have to wake up to breathe. I don't wear oxygen, you know, that you have food in front of you, you know, you've had a livelihood. If you had a job, you had mentors. You had people who took a chance on you and said, why don't you jump out of this and take on this? I think of your career, Tom. You know, why not expand? You know, somebody said that to us, you know. And he said the second question is, what did you do to deserve the blessing? And he said the answer is frequently not much. You know, so that you get to go on a beautiful walk, that you have, my wife is with me. She's healthy. You know, we have a grandbaby. You know, he said, the more you practice gratitude, you'll get grateful for smaller and smaller things. He said you'll start to get grateful for, you know, this wasn't the best meal I had at this restaurant, but this is food. You know, he said, if you see that change in yourself where you're not going to storm into the kitchen of the restaurant unless it was a terrible experience. But he said, if you can start to say things like that, you'll get grateful for smaller and smaller things.
I totally get that. Yeah.
Isn't that neat? It just was like, stuck with me. He was a 92-year-old guy at the time. And
it could be something, I know, that sounds like you're brushing your teeth and you're like, you know, I'm really I know this is going to sound silly, but you're like, I'm grateful that my house has plumbing that works.
Right.
Look at this. I mean, you know, I always wanted to own a house, and I have a house, and it's stood the test of time. And you lived in the same house in Shrewsbury, and it just starts to grow. You're like, and
exactly.
You know,
I think I saw it too in my career, where I saw people who lacked basic things. I went on a relief trip one time, and it was pretty dramatic. Central America, you know, people that didn't have water and were carrying water and drinking water that wasn't anything like we get out of a fountain or out of a faucet. And yet I've been in parts of St. Louis too where the same deficits exist. And, you know, sometimes people who have made decisions that have created their issues, you know, with abuse or inattentive, you know, to caring for their health and addiction and things of that sort. But I also think a simple gift like that, a gift like a baseball coach who knew I had no potential to be interviewed by Tom Ackerman someday, you know, who said stuff like, you need to get a grip on what's going on with you and not worry so much about getting on the field. You know, it was, I would never have expected that gift.
Yeah.
I just thought he was my baseball coach.
That's pretty cool. You know, they're like when I started doing baseball games, I was like, I had that internal voice of like, can you believe that you're doing baseball games? Or it was, now I could have misinterpreted that as like imposter syndrome. Like you don't belong. I can't believe they know.
If they really knew you.
If they really knew you don't know what you're doing or something like that. Or it could be that my voice is actually telling me, be grateful every single time that you put that microphone on there. Others that would like to be doing what you're doing. That's how I interpret that. And it stands today. I know exactly what you're talking about. You know, that kind of feeling.
It is. It's neat. And I think even as a kid, again, like just helping with the blues, that was running errands between periods and, you know, to drive guys over to the old Jewish hospital because there wasn't an x-ray machine in the arena, you know, and have a professional athlete getting his shoulder looked at and I'm driving him, you know, but then learning where these guys came from. Not too many European guys back then, but just like hearing them when you'd get to know them and have them say, yeah, I grew up in this town of, you know, 850 people and I played here and I played there. You know, these guys who overcame a tremendous amount, just something like in athletics, you know, was striking, much less. I've met physicians who I would say, what got you interested in medicine? And one of them said, I suffered a bad injury as a kid, an accident. And I became interested in how musculature works and how nerves work, and that's why I'm in neuromedicine. You know, like how does somebody go from something you can interpret as, I got screwed, you know, I was in an accident I didn't cause, and how does somebody take that and transform it? You know, and there's a lot of that goes on in people when you know their stories.
I remember going through some notes before I talked to you, and SoundStory asked you about family traditions, and you said anytime I get to spend with my kids, and you also said playing catch, but anytime that you get to spend with your kids, I loved how simple that was. So are there any family trips that stand out, or is that just an accumulation of what we were just talking about, just the simple getting together for a family Sunday dinner?
It's both, you know, because I respect that our kids, they need to emerge in their lives now. You know, they have significant others, they have careers, you know, I need to respect that. But we've been helping watch our granddaughter. She's bouncing back from RSV and from two hospitalizations. And here's an example of Marianne's approach. She said, we'll never get a chance like this to watch the baby till she can go back to daycare. That's an example where she flips that, you know. But so we see them more. But things like catch, just being in the yard. We did go to Ireland with our boys.
Oh, wow.
That was really cool. You know,
what was that like?
It was just really fun. You know, my wife has relatives there. One of them raises dairy cattle, a second cousin. So we saw these dairy cattle, and we saw literally like border collies moving sheep from a pasture down a road to another pasture, just stuff that is sort of mythical in a way. And another relative had a pub. And it was the pub in the town, you know, and people came and played music and brought instruments in, you know, so it was really, but just, that was one of the times I was really struck. It was post-college for our kids, and I thought, these guys are men, you know, they're turning into men. And then hearing the stories, I think as a parent, like one of our son Tim got a promotion recently. Andy got recognized by Big Brothers, Big Sisters. You know, like those are the things as a parent where you feel like if I go now, I think they're okay, you know, and I think financially a worry or things like that, but I just wanted them to be good men. And I can just see that in each conversation. And sometimes just saying hello. I dropped something off for Andy on the way down here just to see him for 5 minutes. It's a gift, you know.
He's at Purina, right?
Tim's the one at Purina.
Tim's at Purina.
Andy's at BJC.
And
he can work. He works from home a fair amount of the time. So it's just neat to see him. How'd they get into what they're doing? You know, how did Tim get into college? There's a path you can kind of look back and see in recruiting. Andy worked with AmeriCorps at an inner city school on the East Coast, volunteered for a year. You know, they both have had these experiences that kind of shake you up a little bit, make you think about life a little differently. Yeah, so really anytime, you know, just a phone call or a text. I mean, they're sweet kids. It's hard to, it doesn't sound accurate to call a young man sweet, but they're sweet kids.
Yeah.
And they'll text and say, Dad, just thinking about you. What are you up to? You know? And mostly say, Dad, this is your time. Go do stuff. Do what you love doing, you know? So I feel like we're in a good, sweet spot with these kids.
When I get into these books, what am I going to pull from? What would you want me to pull from them ultimately?
I would appreciate it if, I wrote them to be workbooks and not to be the person who advised me about writing said, if they want to look at a textbook, they'll go to school, so write what you want people to think about. And the one about mission, in a nutshell, I would say it came from a first time I went to Ireland with Marianne. I got pulled out of line in the security line at the Shannon airport. There had been an elevation and a terrorist concern for the British Isles, and we weren't aware of that when we were flying over. And an agent pulled me out of line like they did other people and asked 4 questions. Who are you? Where are you coming from? Where are you going? And why are you going there? And then that person takes you to the second agent, and they take you to the third. And they're looking for inconsistencies. And so I'm past muster, I'm Don Eggleston from St. Louis going to these counties. We're on vacation. But I remember saying, these are questions we should be asking all the time. We should be asking these. So that's what the first one's kind of about. Like, how do you ask these questions? And how do you roll them up into your decisions? How do you roll them up into a workplace? How do you help make change occur in the light of it? The second one is my rather meager attempt about hearing so much about dialogue. That we need dialogue. We need political dialogue. We need dialogue between people who are in all these different points around identity and age and race and gender identity and so forth. And I think the missing piece is we don't have an inner dialogue first. That was my point, was like, what do you value? What do I value and why do I value that? Instead of saying, you're an idiot because, you didn't go to school as long as I did, or you're a jerk because you hold this particular point of view, or you're too immature to understand what I understand. That to me it's just not serving us at all. So I wanted to write just a little attempt to help people in business, education, and social service in particular. And there's just a set of questions. How do you start? And it's things you know how to do, Tom, from interviewing people, but not, a lot of us don't know how to do that. And that's so it ends up in a production studio. But how do you learn to listen? And also, how do you learn? So like, I think the example I gave you of, once I understood the effect that being in an alcoholic family had on my self-esteem and on my ability to have confidence in my decisions, once I knew that inside, the whole world opened up, including, am I worthy of asking this girl out? If SSM promotes me, this is when they're going to find out I'm not capable. Instead of saying, they asked me to interview for this, because they saw something in me, so I think the 2 dialogues to me is we can always blab about stuff, but do we have enough self-understanding to listen to people without being threatened? And then to listen and to, inform our opinions. It's kind of back to my irritation with what I call anti-social media, which is, I even see it on sites like LinkedIn. I think, isn't this supposed to be a professional job-seeking thing? And there's little zingers that people put in there. And I think that's so we can help each other, look for work, and we can help each other sell ideas.
Yeah. I sometimes find it a challenge on Twitter if a Cardinals fan comes at me, or anybody for that matter. Like, by the end of our conversation, whether it's over Twitter or sometimes I'll direct message them, that they want to go have a beer with me afterwards. That's what I want, and it happens. Like, hey,
good.
Hey man, I really enjoyed this. Let's go. Sometimes I think people want to be heard. I really love that perspective you just gave. I actually was just flipping through your first book here, and I caught something which gives me this final question I wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
What is in Don Eggleston's trophy case? when you look at it.
Yeah. My wife, my kids, some of my teachers, John Wickersham, who taught me in college. I still see him. He's teaching at Maryville part-time still, and he was a profound influence. He taught us, he encouraged a bunch of us to go to Colorado and hike and backpack. And we were about the least equipped backpackers, that like an iron skillet tied to your belt and stuff, things that were just ridiculous. But he got me into nature. So I think in my trophy cases are those people. And then I could pack 1 million experiences into there. I think including difficult experiences, they belong in there. There aren't too many achievement things in my trophy case. I'm not really concerned about that. So I would say people packed in there, and then teachers and mentors. There's not enough room for all of them.
Appreciate this. This has been really nice to be able to visit with you. I hope you feel the same.
I do. Tom and Tyler, too. I really appreciate you giving up your time. I know how busy you are, so thank you, both of you.
It is absolutely our pleasure. Tyler Rosen's our producer here in the KMOX studios. SoundStory. Love SoundStory.
Yeah.
And really appreciated spending some time with you. Thanks, Tom. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Tyler,
Thank you for listening to this SoundStory with Don Eggleston.